All right, guys. So we're trying to hit the life and not hit the aspect of the shark here on this Exsanginous. So I'm going to give a sacrifice to our holy Lord, Lord Gaben. There you
I
go.
thought we were trying to RN Jesus. Oh,
RNGesus,
oop.
Lord Gaben. I think they're the same person, aren't they? But yeah, we're gonna sacrifice this Omnis to the gods here. All right. So good luck. We need to not hit aspect of the shark, guys. Otherwise we're screwed. All right, Rain, say your prayers.
Insert tribal chanting here.
Uka shaka, uka, uka, uka shaka, uka,
Oh,
uka.
God.
I can't fight this feeling woo! Deep
Nice.
inside of
Nice.
me.
Okay.
I can't remember the rest
Great.
of
We
the
are
lyrics.
correct.
Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we are playing low-life crit multi-shot shotgun Nightbringer fake marksman Bladedancer, a build that was spawned out of pure RNG and has literally no right to even exist. Before we get into the video, I just want to mention a few things. Low life is bad, objectively so. Like, significantly worse than other options in terms of EHP and sustain, especially at this investment level. This is kind of my answer to a lot of people's questions. There was recently a low-life shuriken Bladedancer running around YouTube recently, and I kept getting questions about it. So instead of just saying it was bad, I would provably show you it was bad through just playing a version myself. One of the biggest problems with high corruption currently is the damage on enemies scales significantly faster than their HP modifiers. This means that eventually you will die, no matter how tanky you are. Right now, in the video, I have around 4.5k ward sitting still, which is significantly more than every video I've seen, and it still feels insanely squishy, even with cap glancing blow and 20% armor and 24% reduced damage taken. Even at 300 corruption, which I am hovering around currently, there is no possible way that you could push a character like this. Even if you had infinite damage, your time would be absolutely miserable, as you would be constantly dying. Even if you had like infinite damage, in like, you'd still be dying with all these extra defenses. This is because when you take damage with an Exsanginous and last steps on, this means that if you take a gigantic hit like 3k plus with my current setup, it takes a very long time to get back up to maximum ward, which means that that is time that anything could easily kill us. So we may have 4,000 ward while standing still, but in practice we hover around 2.5 to 3k in monoliths. This is the main problem with low life, as with normal HP, you should have enough sustain to shoot up instantly with almost every other build, especially on Bladedancer with so much leech and sustain that you just have access to. So the tankiness is somewhat of an illusion, and if all you do is set your corruption from 300 to 1300 with your notepad on offline mode, you would never know this, as you skip the entire grind from 1 to 1300. One thing we did learn, though, actually, is one of the reasons why low life actually feels good to play, though, even if the numbers are objectively bad, is how it interacts with stuns currently. Currently, for the stun calculation, if you have 2k HP and 4k ward, the game will calculate stuns as if you're a combination of your health pools, even if your HP is quote-unquote missing. So I am technically at 6k effective HP versus stuns, versus just only 4k with what you would assume normally. This means you never get stunned as much, which is why low life can feel like really tanky in early corruption, right? That's why it feels good early on, because you're never getting stunned, which means you're never getting nailed in place, which means you're never dying. But this is not throughout the entire game if you push up corruption, right? So that's part of it. So the fact that you don't get stunned as often is just feels great, but that's the only thing. Like, this is the only saving grace of the current mechanic. If you want to know more about Exsanginous and why it's currently not a good item, I will be leaving a video by Perry the Pig down in the description here. Now, if you end up learning something new about the game or enjoying the content, I'd suggest leaving a like on the video or subscribing to the channel, as that is the best way you want to tell me that you want more of this. This stuff takes a lot of time to work on. Even with all of this luck, this still took significantly longer than my normal setup on builds because I had to essentially grind out all the items. So this build was spawned through a meme that I had with a friend recently with the critical strike vulnerability changes that shook marksman, that we should just go low life Bladedancer to abuse the low life base crit. And by magic through a crazy night, we had almost every single piece we possibly could have to make low life possible and even feel good. The first item is a 2 LP Exsanginous with a bunch of life on it. This helps a lot with maintaining a large ward value while stationary. This is the first thing you would need to play a build like this. Otherwise, you'd end up with way too little ward for higher end content, specifically much higher corruption. The second item was a Last Steps of the Living with a tier 6 hybrid health affix. This alone would take a very long time to farm. We do get around the downside of the chills thanks to the constant cleanse from our shift and our smoke bomb, which essentially turns off the downside entirely. The third item is a Nightbringer Quiver, which gives us a bunch of flat void damage, which is great for us as it benefits us for being at low life, which is something that we need to make this even feel good. And we also hit cold resistance on it, which helps a lot with the next item. The fourth item is a Frostbite Shackles. This gives us a lot of extra cold to ward retention that we would not have, which is very nice as ward retention is one of the biggest problems with, of course, Exsanginous in general. The intelligence on it as well gives us another phenomenal 44% ward retention, which is great. The fifth and sixth items we made for this build are our Heirlooms of the Lost Nomad, which both give us a lot of flat HP and much needed resistances that we need on this setup. The both of them give us about 180% increased stun duration on ourselves, which triples our time when we get stunned. But because of what I discussed earlier in the intro, we're essentially unstunnable in most situations. But let me tell you, when I do get stunned, it feels awful, like it's forever. So maybe these aren't the best choices ever. Now, the last item we made for this character is a 1 LP Drill Course. This was assuming that we, of course, actually hit it, which we did, which was very amusing, right? We hit it off our first time with a Rune of Ascendance, right? We got a 1 LP Drill Course, and then, of course, we hit the bow attack speed modifier on it, which is even more crazy. So if you don't understand what I'm trying to say here, this is a lot of effort and investment for not a lot of benefits. If I put this much effort and investment into any other build with HP or endurance or just anything, even mage for God's sakes, like anything, right? We would be significantly tankier, right? The fact that we have 4K ward, but we're still as squishy as possible, it really doesn't look good for low life in general, because I have essentially what I would call the low bar of making low life work. Even if I were to swap to shurikens, like what a lot of other people play and have a lot more damage than the current multi-shot setup, this would still not make the build viable. Infinite damage cannot solve the corruption issue currently, as there are enemies that will still kill you, especially if you're set up like I am currently, and swapping to shurikens would not solve this either. So I just want to point out, this is not meant to be a build guide. This is not a build you should play. This is awful. But of course, we had to go through the process so I could show you guys the actual problems with the build. Now, of course, we're going to go in game and I'm going to showcase all my gear, showcase all my skills, showcase how the build works and all that. But please, for the love of God, do not play this build. Let's go in game, shall we? All right, here we are in game with the marksman. Totally a marksman, right? By the way. So the general rotation of the build is, while we're shifting around, of course, we remove the downside of the Last Steps of the Living, which gives us a large boost in movement speed, which is great, as we, this is actually a pretty zoomy build, which helps a lot. And of course, we multi-shot everything. Now, currently, with our current setup, with the setup of Point Blank and Giant Slayer, this means that we need to be inside the target, essentially, to do most of our damage. Now, sadly, due to EHC's infinite wisdom, they have decided to combine numbers of damage on the dummy here. And the way that we can prove this here is if we actually put in a point to won't back down here, right? So we're going to get down to 0 mana, right? So right now we're hitting like 70k, like twice on the dummy, right? 70k, 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 right? And then watch what happens when we get a mana 5. That means each arrow that we're doing, that we're shooting out, right, is doing 7k damage. And then that 7k, like that 7k per arrow, when we hit the target at the same time, it is being pooled into the same hit. So technically, this damage that you're seeing is actually what we're doing with all of the arrows combined because they changed it. Now, that kind of sucks. It's really annoying because it makes evaluating builds like this much harder than it has to be, but it's still fine, right? So let me fix that real quick. There you go. Now that's how our damage is. So even with all of this investment, right? Even with every single thing I possibly could do to make this function and feel good, we only have around 200 to 100k per hit, which is very poor for how much investment we actually have into this build. As you can tell, all of our pieces are pink. So yeah. So let's go into skills, shall we? So first skill, of course, is Multishot with the shotgun setup with our Giant Slayer specifically. We really like this. The main reason why this build even functions is because they buffed piercing shots so that we have extra max pierces. Before, it was a 45% chance to pierce, which was absolutely god-awful with Giant Slayer, as your clear was much worse than what you saw in the footage. Even then, the clear is like okay to mediocre. So this change is amazing for Multishot and makes actual Giant Slayer builds viable. Now, of course, we have point blank as well for the 75% more hit damage against close targets. Another thing we utilize is strong pull. The main reason why this is this doesn't actually give us that much more DPS, but what it does is it reduces the mana cost of our a multi-shot technically, because the less we're attacking, the less that we're spending mana. So the bigger hits, but the less hits means the less attacks, which means less mana consumed, which means we can sustain our mana, which is great, which we're going to talk about shift here. One of the best nodes inside shift, which is really cool for us, is the fact that we can abuse swift recovery. So whenever we are below half health, we gain a bunch more mana than normal. So that means if I'm just spamming around with multi-shot, right? Bam, we're at max mana, which is absolutely amazing. This is one of the only reasons why low life even feels good on this build, is because of the fact that we have so much mana sustained for free, which is cool. We also have, of course, the cleanse ailment, and then we have the shurikens for the armor scaling. Everything else is just self-explanatory. We then, of course, have Smoke Bomb. Smoke Bomb's the usual setup with the Dust Shroud investment and also as well as Cleansing Steam. On top of all this, it means that we get to cap Glancing Blow pretty easily. Right now, our Apostasy is not working, so just take double your dodge and then add it to your Glancing Blow, and that's about what you normally have. So we're capped Glancing Blow as we have our Dust Shrouds. This is the only way of getting capped in a reasonable manner, as we do not have access to a quiver. And of course, Glancing Blow is really strong with low life, mainly because it's just a less damage multiplier on our ward, which is one of the best things that makes ward even viable, right? Which is cool, right? So shurikens, we only care about the Fizz Shred because half of our damage is physical. This gives us Fizz Shred, so we don't have to get the blessing. And that is very, very important, as the physical shred resistance blessing is also conflicting with our cold res blessing, which is very important, which I'll talk about in a second here. So the fact that this gives us Fizz Shred is amazing. But of course, we're mainly using it for bladed armor. We're at like 334 armor. This brings up to 800. Now, of course, that may not seem like much, but everything counts when you're trying to go low life, because one of the biggest problems with low life currently is, as you can tell, with the base armor, with the Exsanginous and the last steps and the Frostbite Shackles, these do not have much armor. You need other armor scaling to make it better, because armor is one of the best ways of scaling ward, because it makes every single point of ward that much more efficient, which is cool. And of course, Puncture, it's just a mana setup with Rapid Strikes, Mind Piercer, and Press the Attack. This makes it so that, of course, we can sustain mana on a single target, because when we're doing like clear like this, we do need to suck up some mana, right, for our smoke bombs and stuff. So we need to make sure that we have a Puncture, and of course, with all that attack speed, it feels good. All right, that's pretty much it for the skills. Now for the passives here, this will be down in the description as well, but mainly we care about stuff like evasion, less damage taken while moving, makes it so that our low life ward is even better. Getting the glancing blow, the attack speed, the mana, this helps our puncture give us a lot more mana back on usage. This is absolutely essential, as one of the biggest things that we're missing on this build in general is percentage damage, as it's very hard to scale percentage bow damage on a Bladedancer because we don't have access to Sharpshooter, which is, of course, a bunch of free percentage damage for free that you don't really have access to, which is funny. Of course, for marksman, we care more about draining arrows. Once you get enough HP, the HP gain doesn't fuck with us much. Missile mastery is very strong for very efficient. We also have heightened senses for the 25% bow critical strike multiplier. We don't care about the crit avoidance, because one thing that's really cool about this build is with Nightbringer, enemies cannot crit us as long as we're hitting them, as long as they're blind, which we blind them with smoke bomb, and we blind them on hit with multi-shot, which is really cool. Now, of course, for Bladedancer here, we don't really have that many options of things that we can use. So, of course, we use like Cloak of Shadows. We use once, so we get the dodge if hit recently. We get the movement speed from Pursuit. We get the HP and Dust Shroud when hit. This essentially makes us very tanky versus a bunch of like little enemies, as they hit us, they get us all the way to glancing blow cap very easily with just a few Dust Shrouds, which is really funny. Of course, apostasy, this is important. Otherwise, we would not be able to cap our glancing blow on this build because we're not running a glancing blow quiver. Of course, we have flat dodge rating here. We have some crit as well, some crit multi, and then of course the node that makes the whole build work, Death Store. The main reason why we're even playing a Bladedancer is the fact that we don't have that much base crit as a marksman anymore because of the nerf to crit vulnerability, which means that we need to abuse other sources of base crit to get to crit cap, which is really funny with Death Store. Now, this is the only reason that this is even possible to do, right? So that's pretty much it for the passives. Now for the gearing. Now, before I show you this gear, let me let you know, none of this is possible within a decent time frame. You could literally invest this amount of gear into any other concept and do significantly better. This is essentially wasted investment. We were doing this on purpose so that I could show you guys how bad it actually is. Okay. Now, of course, our helmet, we have a lot of increased damage, right, which is really important because we don't have that much increased. We have an Omnis just to cap our resistances, right? Otherwise, we would not be anywhere near capping our resistances right now, which is pathetic. A drill cores with attack speed. This helps a lot because we don't get that much bow attack speed because we're not, of course, a marksman, and marksman gets bow attack speed for just existing, which is funny. Heirlooms, this gives us a bunch of flat health. This build would have significantly less ward if we took off our heirlooms. That is why we're running heirlooms. Otherwise, we would have literally almost little to no ward. So the heirlooms are very strong, as you can tell. It gives us a lot of extra ward, gives us a lot of extra cold res if they rolled better, gives us a lot of flat HP to scale the Exsanginous. And of course, like I said in the clip, we're not getting stunned that often. And of course, we have a bunch of cleanse. We can use a pot. Like overall, like heirlooms are the way to go on a low life build. And of course, chains of Oreos here, making it so that whenever we pop a potion, we don't actually gain life, we gain ward instead, which is important because Exsanginous gives us a bonus for, of course, popping a potion as well. And we get a bunch of ward for that, so it actually adds to our sustain significantly. It is very easy to actually get an LP version of this, so this is actually one of the least expensive parts of the build. And of course, a Frostbite Shackles, of course, because the ward retention per uncapped cold res. The build literally does not function without this. As you can tell, yeah, the build literally does not function without this. This is required 100% to make this even function on a Bladedancer specifically, because otherwise, as you can tell, you have no ward retention. This is our only source of ward retention on a Bladedancer. Of course, last steps to the living. I got insanely lucky with this. This is very hard to get something like this. So have fun with that. And of course, this is just simply a way to like cap our reses, give us damage, stuff like that, which is cool. And then of course we have a bunch of stuff like increased damage with multi-shot, and eventually we'd have a bunch of cold res and ward retention idols to and push our ward retention further. And that's pretty much it for the build. Do not play this. If you play this and it's terrible, it is not my fault. With all that being said, this is Dread, off to go play a real build. Bye.